We invite you to stay tuned for the live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study of the Mayfield Drive Baptist Church, located at 271 Mayfield Drive, Smyrna, Tennessee. We will now join the service.
Three. Hey, there we go. All right. So, as I was saying, good evening. We're going to switch up tonight, and we're going to open up with a song. We're going to go turn to in our hymnals 171, "More About Jesus." No. More about Jesus would I know, more of His grace to others show, more of His saving fullness see, more of His love who died for me. More about Jesus. More about Jesus. More of His saving fullness see. More of His love who died for me. More about Jesus, let me learn. More of His holy will discern. Spirit of God, my teacher be, showing the things of Christ to me. More about Jesus. More about Jesus. More of His saving fullness see. More of His love who died for me. More about Jesus in His word. Holding communion with my Lord. Hearing His voice in every line. Making each faithful saying mine. More about Jesus. More about Jesus. More of His saving fullness see. More of His love who died for me. More about Jesus on His throne, riches in glory all His own. More of His kingdom sure increase, more of His coming Prince of Peace. More about Jesus. More about Jesus. More of His saving fullness see. More of His love doing good for me. Amen.
All right. We welcome you back again to our Wednesday evening Bible study here at Mayfield Drive Baptist Church. And there's nothing like a good song to get everyone ready, for the. Yeah. All right. So that's what a good song service does, even just one. More about Jesus. Well, we are looking at the life of Paul in our continued study, and he called himself at one point the chief of sinners, and that's the reason we titled this study, "The Chief." And so we're looking at number 21, part 21 of this series. We may have several more parts before it's finished, and that's okay. I want to cover it completely. We are looking at this evening Apollos. We're taking a short break from the Apostle Paul and looking at this gentleman. And it would be a disservice to the ministry of Paul and to the history of New Testament churches if we just sort of skipped over this fellow. We don't hear a whole lot about him, but yet he became a very important part of the origin and development of New Testament churches. So our text verse comes from Acts chapter 18. We're looking at verses 23 through 28. And after he had spent some time there, this is talking about Paul now, he departed and went over all the country of Galatia and Phrygia in order, strengthening all the disciples. In order, meaning that as he came to them. All right, and a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, that's in Egypt, an eloquent man and mighty in the scriptures, came to Ephesus. This man was instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in the Spirit, he spake and taught diligently the things of the Lord, knowing only the baptism of John. And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom, when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them, and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly. And when he was disposed to pass into Achaia, the brethren wrote, exhorting the disciples to receive him, who, when he was come, helped them much which had believed through grace. For he mightily convinced the Jews, and that publicly, showing by the Scriptures that Jesus was Christ. So we're going to, by way of introduction this evening, we're going to take a short break from the Apostle Paul to an individual who played a great part in the spread of the gospel during the time of Paul. To neglect to consider him will be a great disservice to those early churches and to those who were actively involved at that time. The man's name was Apollos. Apollos is a shortened version of Apollonius. There you go. You get them in right order and it changes the whole pronunciation of the name Apollonius. He was a Hellenized Jewish Christian. Now, Hellenized means he was Greek. He was Greek taught, and he had Greek customs. I have no idea where Hellenization and Greek came to be each other, but that's the way it is. So when we say Hellenization, just think about Greek. All right, so he was a Hellenized Jewish Christian who hailed from Alexandria, which was the second largest city in the Roman Empire. He's introduced in Acts 18, verses 24 and 25, where it states that he came to Ephesus. It probably was around 52 to 54 CE. Apollos was a learned man and an eloquent speaker. he was probably one of these fellows that had a way with words. You know, you've heard speakers before that just make public speaking seem so easy and can always put the right words together to paint a picture of what they're trying to tell you. I imagine that Apollos was like that. He came from an environment that was conducive to studying and learning the scriptures. Alexandria had a library of over 500,000 scrolls. The sad part about that is that that library burned, and all of those ancient scrolls were all destroyed. There is no telling what kind of knowledge was lost in the destruction of that library. He might have been a commercial traveler who had a trade, and we're not told that he did. Yet it is likely that he came to Ephesus for the purpose of doing mission work. It says that he taught about Jesus accurately, but that he only knew the baptism of John and nothing about the salvation of Christ. He spoke boldly in the synagogue, just as the disciples had done. And that's where he met Priscilla and Aquila, who heard him preaching and teaching there. But when his information fell short, they thoroughly instructed him. They apparently corrected his incomplete knowledge of Christian doctrine. To his credit, Apollos was very teachable and willing to learn. What a waste it would have been if he had not been that way. He did not, however, need to be rebaptized. Why? Because he knew the baptism of John. All right? And he had been baptized by John. And probably the bulk of his knowledge had come from John's teaching. All right, let's look at Apollos the preacher now. John the Baptist. Yes, John the Baptist. Somewhere he had made connection with John the Baptist. He could take prophecy, psalms, history, and the ritual and make the Jewish congregations feel the great longing of the world for 4,000 years had at last found its answer in the advent of Jesus as Christ. Some modern scholars declare that he wrote the epistle to the Hebrews, according to Robinson, but probably not. Apollos knew only the baptism of John. If he could be so eloquent about water, what will he be when he comes to speak of blood? We shall find this man doing wonders in the church. Yes. Dutton. At one convention, or a yearly wing convention, he was unable to be there. And so, being the deputy chaplain, it fell my part to bring the invocation. And he, being the chief chaplain, he wrote a prayer that he wanted me to read. So when I got up there, I said, now, this is Chaplain Dutton's. I said, I am not eloquent like he is. And boy, that got a laugh out of everybody. They knew, they knew how he could put words together. So I said, this is not my wording, it's his.
All you had to do was read it and they would have known.
Right. So we're going to find that Apollos, he had his way of putting words together, and he knew how to put it to use for the Lord's work. It is possible to teach even the alphabet earnestly. Apollos knew only the alphabet. But he taught the separate letters as if they were separate poems. You get the idea. The fervent man touches everything with his fervor. I'll tell you the type of preacher that I like to hear. And no, it doesn't include you. Anyway, before I was so rudely interrupted.
By your pastor.
I'll be honest, I like to hear a black man that has a way with words. I love to hear such a man. I've heard several during my lifetime. I mean, they can put words together that you are right there, and they can bring out the truth of God's word in such a way that it sends chills down your spine, Yeah, or I can't help me either, so. So I doubt that you and me, either one, or even Jamie would even come close to Apollos.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, Jerry wouldn't either. All right. Do not despise the teachers who are not teaching exactly the fullness of the gospel. If they are teaching up to the measure of their intelligence, thank God for their cooperation. Now, that was a quote of Dr. Garner's in the Power Bible CD as Parker. I don't have any idea who the man was that he quoted there. I have heard men sort of like that. But I don't know how, Brother Bernie, you were taught in Florida Baptist schools, but in Eastern Baptist years, and of course it's been out of existence for many, many years now, but when I was in that seminary, we were taught, don't neglect to pay attention to whoever is in the pulpit preaching. God put him there. God gave him a message to bring. And he will have something that you can use. So I've listened to men whose ability to use the English language was not quite up to par. And I just cringe, when the grammar doesn't quite fit it. But yet, I reminded myself of what they tried to teach us in seminary. Listen, God knows what he's doing. And sometimes, some of the men that he places in the ministry, you wonder, God lost his mind? But he hadn't. God uses all types and kinds of men. That's right. Yeah, Peter's a good example. Yes, sir. Yeah. Very few white men honestly have that ability. And it is a God-given ability. All right, Apollos apparently arrived in Ephesus shortly after Paul had departed. Then, as with Paul and his company, Apollos went to the synagogue to preach. He was a Jew. He would be expected to go to the synagogue. He was well versed in the Old Testament scriptures. So combined with his knowledge of the scriptures and his eloquence and his presentation of them made him a man who could and no doubt did influence many people. It has been said that Alexandria had a very large Jewish population of 1 million Jews that lived in Egypt. And a good portion of that 1 million lived in Alexandria. It was a place that attracted philosophers, with many, such as Philo, having a home there. Philo was a Jewish philosopher and was reportedly an eloquent preacher. It's thought that he probably had an influence on Apollos. According to verse 25 of our text, what Apollos taught was accurate, but he lacked the complete knowledge that was needed concerning Jesus, and I might add, his church. Somewhere in his adult life, he had met with John the Baptist and was baptized by him. His beginning knowledge of the scriptures concerning Jesus probably came from John. That knowledge, combined with his own study and research, caused him to understand the written word concerning Jesus. And of course, all he had were Old Testament scriptures. Hearing him preach in the synagogue there in Ephesus, Aquila and Priscilla took him probably to their home and began to teach him the way more completely. They began to round out his knowledge. There seemed to be nothing wrong with what he preached. He just did not have the complete picture. Dr. Albert Garner puts it in this way. They instructed him more clearly, accurately, or explicitly than when John the Baptist had preached. Brother Garner's another one of those that can put words together. I remember the first time that he lectured in EBI, and we were supposed to take notes of all the guest speakers. It took about everything that you had to understand what he was saying. Forget taking notes. It was not different from, but in harmony with and supplemental to the preaching of John. since the church had been established, instructed, commissioned, or mandated, and empowered of the Holy Spirit, and special gifts since the preaching of John, some of which Apollos did not know. Yes, I don't doubt that at all. he, I had him in Jamaica with us. He was down about, I don't know, an entire week. I probably told this before, and he was, I think, 83 at, huh? He turned 80, yes, the week that he was with us in Jamaica. And you know how just what we just read there was a quote, okay? You saw that how he put words together and not small words either. So I told him, I said, Doc, I said, uh, don't be afraid to use long words that they may not know and understand. But I said, if you do, define them. And he did excellent. There was he was completely understandable that whole week. I tell you what, he wore me out. There's no indication of just how long Apollos stayed in Ephesus. We have no idea. With his completed knowledge of the truth, he soon established himself as someone who could greatly help teach others. It didn't take him long to prove himself, so to speak. To that end, he desired to go to Achaia, otherwise known as Greece. With his desire made known to the church at Ephesus, the brethren of the church wrote a letter of introduction for those disciples there in Greece to welcome him. Verse 27 relates to us that he helped them much. Verse 28 relates that he was able to mightily convince the Jews openly and publicly through the scriptures that Jesus indeed was the Christ identified in them. Now let's look at Apollos in Corinth. He had a very special talent for debate. And he, quote, he vigorously refuted the Jews in public debate, proving from the scriptures that Jesus was the Christ. He became very, yes ma'am, sorry. Yes. I think we left it in Jamaica. Yes. In the late 40s, 50s, and 60s, public debate among different preachers of different denomination was very popular. Yes. No, there wasn't any, it wasn't that debate. That was a Bible conference that, yeah, that we had attended. I don't remember, after I had graduated, I don't remember, and for many years, hearing of any debates being held. It's just not done anymore. Uh, no, I don't. I don't. They
Now,
um,
for sure.
now, yes, that it would happen that way now, but then they were always gentlemanly. Uh, they would not harass. They would not make fun of, or anything like that. It was always orderly. Yes. Um, and if you were so inclined, you could learn a lot too. But that's just that it had its heyday for many, many years, and it's something that's not any longer done. People now would not come to listen to a debate. No, 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 we do not. No. Um, and those who attended were not necessarily lost people. They were church people. They were Church of Christ people and Baptist people. Um, they all came together to listen. That's not happening anymore.
Can't get people to go to church, much less a debate.
Absolutely. You can't hardly get them in church, much less into a debate. That's right. Even for special occasion, you can hardly get people in anymore. All right, back on Apollos, he became very popular in Ephesus. But after a time, he wanted to move forward and went to Corinth. The brothers in Ephesus wrote letters of introduction for him for the Corinthian church. Now, he actually visited another church before he got to Corinth. And so this letter of introduction, and it was good that he had this letter of introduction from men who were known in Ephesus, because he was an unknown. Okay? And so this helped open the doors for him with these other churches. We read in 1 Corinthians that he was a learned man with a thorough knowledge of the Scriptures, having been instructed in the way of the Lord. Apparently, he learned his lessons well. Nonetheless, after he left Corinth, Chloe's people told Paul that there were quarrels in the Corinthian church. People were lining up behind their favorite leaders. Some were choosing to follow Apollos, some Cephas, Peter, or Paul, or Christ. Scholars would love to know what is meant by, or who is represented by, the quote-unquote Christ group. Was this perhaps a fourth group composed of those who refused to join into the fray? We don't know. Did they reject all the leaders? No one knows. But it surely indicates that smaller groups existed. There's a reason to consider these groups in terms of their social implications. since Apollos hailed from Alexandria. He is thought to have been well versed in the arts of eloquence and argument. And as a learned man, he would be the sort of leader a cultured, wealthy individual might want to follow. Cephas has traditionally been aligned with the Jewish Christians and could easily have been the leader of preference for those who were unwilling to totally depart from their Jewish heritage. Paul, while making himself all things to everyone, was likely favored by the Gentiles. In any event, now there were divisions and people are quarreling, shouting at each other, each claiming to belong to separate leaders. Paul wants them to knit together, not to be clones of each other, but to share the same basic convictions and to be together in the goals of the community. I'm sure that all of these men that are mentioned, Apollos, Cephas, and Paul, they all preached the same gospel. And probably there was no deviation in the content, perhaps in the delivery, but not so much in the content. He, Paul, makes no suggestion that one is right and the others are wrong, but asks that they each bring what they have to further the good of the community. In 1 Corinthians chapters 3 and 4, Paul is adamant that both he and Apollos are on the same page. They are both engaged in building up the church. They are both servants of Christ and stewards of God's mysteries. What did Paul say? He said, I have planted, Apollos has watered, and God has given the increase. All right, let's look at the further ministry of Apollos. There is much evidence in the scriptures that Apollos had a very effective ministry among the churches. Paul refers to him several times and counted him as a fellow servant for the Lord. Apollos would eventually become a major figure among Christians in Corinth. Some members of the Corinthian church had begun to argue among each other about who they followed as their spiritual leader. Some were saying they followed Paul, while others were saying they followed Apollos or Peter or Christ. You can see that in 1 Corinthians 1:12. When the Apostle Paul was made aware of this, he rebuked the Corinthians, telling them there should be no divisions in the church. There was no reason for them to be divided. Paul continued by telling them that he and Apollos were only servants of God who did the work that the Lord gave them. He said, I planted the seed in your hearts and Apollos watered it, but it was God who made it grow. 1 Corinthians 3:6 is where that's found. They were instructed not to boast about human leaders anymore. Are there any questions, comments before we get into the conclusion? Okay. Then we'll go into the conclusion. The Bible does not give us what happened to Apollos. Some say that Apollos was with Paul when he wrote the first letter to the Corinthians. We later find that Paul requests that Titus bring Zenas the lawyer and Apollos to him as soon as possible. Paul was under house arrest in Rome at the time of his epistle to him, to Titus. We have no record if this ever happened. Some scholars believe that Apollos eventually returned to Corinth after all the controversy disappeared and remained there as a part of the elders of the church. We cannot know how the last years of Apollos were, but if the first years of his ministry are any indication, he served the Lord and the Corinthian church to the best of his ability. Any questions, comments? We don't know. Yes. Amen. That's right. But I think one thing that we could rest assured of is that regardless of what Apollos had faced, he remained true to the Lord. I think he proved that with his life and his ministry to the Lord. All right. Well, Jeremy, would you dismiss us, please?
You've been listening to the live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study of the Mayfield Drive Baptist Church in Smyrna, Tennessee. We invite you to tune in at the same time next Wednesday evening for another live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study. We would love to see your comments regarding this broadcast. You may email us at imbr@imbmpodcast.com. That's imbr@imbmpodcasts.com. Or you may write to us at International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. That's International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. Thank you for listening, and may you have a blessed day.